Hey, how's it going, everyone? So for this video, I'm going to go over a quick engine assembly process, kind of reconditioning process, and that's lapping valves or matching the valve seating face to the valve seats in a cylinder head. So I have a cylinder head here from a Nissan Pathfinder that we've gone through, cleaned everything up. We crack checked it, there's no cracks. The seats are all looking pretty good. They're in pretty good shape. There's a lot of carbon buildup. Kind of look very similar to like these LS heads right here. We got that all cleaned up, and what we're gonna do now is hand lap everything. There's a couple different ways that you can hand lap valves. The first way is with a hand lapping tool. This is effectively is just a stick with a plunger on the end that you suction cup the valve to, and you do it by hand. Or the more modern way, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, the way that I typically do it is with a drill with a little bit of vacuum hose to go on the end of the valve stem. So I've already gone through and faced the valves and refaced them on the valve grinding machine. Cleaned up all the carbon off the back of this and off the base of the stem and off the end of it, and then went through and gave a nice machine surface for the valve. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hand lap them so that they're matched to the seat. Now when we do this, these valves will then have a location that they live in. You can't get them backwards or put them in different spots. They have to go in the position that they came from once hand lapped. Now, you don't have to do this process if you're replacing the seats and the valves, so you have new valves and new seats. Ultimately, when it comes down to that, it will hand lap itself in. And the manufacturers, when cylinder heads are new, like when this Nissan was brand new, Nissan didn't do this. They just shipped it out. Under enough heat cycles, you'll be all right. However, this is something I found that does make the motor seat in a little bit faster. And it's something too that you can look at to make sure that we resurface the valve face, but also now we're going to make sure that the seat is nice and concentric and round, and it's going to seal up. So it's kind of a method that I found that's not too big of a deal to go through to make sure that the cylinder head seat and the valve are going to match together. But it isn't necessarily something that is super necessary. Now, there's a couple different processes to doing this, not only with this, but also in what kind of grinding paste you use. So I'm going to go from a coarse grinding material to a fine grinding material. You can also add in a medium grade. However, this kit that I got from the local parts store just comes as a coarse and a fine. And effectively what this is this is a gridded kind of liquid that you're going to put around the valve face. And that will then cut not only the valve, but also the valve seat itself, and that will wear in a pattern. So we're going to start with coarse and then move to fine. One of the things that is important with this is very, very gritty. If left in the engine, so if you don't do a good enough job cleaning up after this job, you do run the risk of it damaging the motor. So if you have a motor apart that the cylinder head came from, you want to make sure that you're keeping everything clear. When you're hand lapping it with the hand lap tool, it doesn't get too messy because you're not spinning it too fast. However, the drill can definitely fling the lapping compound absolutely everywhere. Some of the things to make this job a little bit easier, so I have this on cylinder head stands, otherwise known as cylinder head skewers. Basically, this is just a metal stand with a spike in it that goes off of the cylinder head mounting holes, and that holds it that way. You can also use, you can home make yourself some cylinder head blocks kind of like this, or a wooden block works as well. But ultimately, you kind of want to make sure that you're comfortable. And when you're doing the hand lapping part, you really do need it to be the cylinder head flipped over and stable for that to be successful. So what we'll do right now is we'll gear up to show how we're going to hand lap by hand, and then also I'm going to do one by using the drill. So we're going to start with this end intake valve. Again, what I like to do is I like to leave everything as organized as possible, so I clear the bench off. So I have the valves laid out in the position that they're going to go back into the cylinder head. That way there's no mismatching them of whatsoever, especially when you go through cleaning everything. You can mark the bench. I a lot of times will mark the bench with a Sharpie on what position it has to be in. You can do either one. So what we'll do is we'll pick our first intake valve. We're going to take the coarse compound first, and we're just going to put just a little bit of this. This is one of those things that you don't want to put too much on, because remember, this valve lapping compound can do a lot of damage to other components. So I like to very, very conservatively put it around the sealing face of the valve, and we're just going to drop this right in. It's usually also a good idea. I found that you want to leave the valve seals out at this point. This cylinder head's going to get fully reassembled. The valve springs and everything are out. It's a good idea to take the valve seats out just because they can get kind of hot and you don't want any of the grit to get stuck in it. But the next thing we need to do is you need to figure out what plunger end, and these come in a variety of different sizes. So these are just some of the sizes I was able to dig around the shop. Obviously, we know which one gets a lot of wear and tear because this one is worn in. But ultimately what you need to do is you need the suction end to actually suction against the valve. So, once that is attached to the valve, so we're suctioned up, you basically are just going to grind it. Now you can hear it start to change pitch. That's usually a good point when you lift the valve up a little bit and you kind of reconnect and gather some more of that grit up, so you can hear it change tone right there. We want to get more of that grit, and we're just going to do this a little bit. Now, one of the other big reasons why you don't want to use too much of the compound at any one time, if this starts to get wet with the compound, it won't stick anymore, and it's a pain in the butt to try to get this thing to restick. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want to use a ton of this. From this point, we'll pull the valve out, and it's really important to keep a rag that's specifically for cleaning up the valve lapping compound so that we don't have this contaminating anything else in the engine. And what we're looking for is we're looking for that dull edge right there. So that dulled up or kind of matte finished edge, when I compare that to a newly finished valve that hasn't been hand lapped, that's nice and shiny, that's showing that is now seated to this valve seat. So this is mated to this specific valve seat, as it were. So we're going to have the same dull kind of positioning or look on here, so we can kind of see that we have it dull right there. We're on another valve seat. It's nice and shiny. So this is now matched to this seat. What we'll then go through is, if we went to coarse, now we're going to go to fine and do the same thing. We're going to do the same exact process. So now I'll move to the fine compound. Just put a little bit on it. So again, we have that nice dull matte finish. This is off the fine compound, so we're a little bit more consistent on our coloring. This means that we now have this nicely seated. Now, one of the things we do want to look for is we want to make sure that it's consistent around the entire diameter of this face. That way we know that the valve end might not be bent slightly, or that the seat's not having an issue. Before you do this, you can do this with Dykem or machinist blue. That will also give you an indication if there's an issue that you can do really, really quick to make sure that your seats are up to snuff. So again, we're looking for that nice consistent pattern around the entire valve seat to make sure that we're nicely seated. And that's the process that we're going to use for hand lapping. The other method is going to be using a drill. And for using a drill, what you're going to do is you need to have a little bit of vacuum line that is going to be a snug fit against the valve stem. And you're going to install the valve through the guide and have it seated, and then you'll attach this and you will spin it with a drill while pushing down on the valve and putting a little bit of pressure. The key with this though, however, is you do need to try to reduce the speed as much as you possibly can as to not overheat the valve. So you want to make sure that you turn the drill way down in speed and you're going about that consistency. All right, so this shows the intake valve installed on its seat and through the guide, and the vacuum hose going up through and attaching to the stem right there. And again, we have the drill speed real slow. We're gonna apply light pressure to the valve, allowing it to bed in the grinding compound, as well as releasing it to allow for that compound to reset up. Now this will go a little faster than the hand lapping process because we do have the assistance of the drill speed and everything up. But what we do want to make sure of is we don't want to start the drill with it, the valve against the, not against the seat or up like this, because centrifugal force will fling all that grinding compound everywhere. So you want to make sure we're nicely seated down onto the seat and just give it a little bit of pressure. And again, that's about all it takes. I have the drill turning to the right as well. That way it will constantly keep tension on the vacuum hose that we're using and it won't try to come loose. That's something that I've noticed. And at this point, we're gonna get the same kind of feature that we had on our other intake valve. We're looking for that kind of matte finish or that dull finish on the valve sealing face. And that will indicate that we have a nice seal or sealing surface that's been mated together. We have the same thing on the valve seat as well. So you go through and do all of the valves, and then we can start to reassemble the cylinder head. So I'll go through coarse and then through fine for all three intakes and all three exhausts. And then from there, you clean the cylinder head really well to get rid of all of this grit, so that there's no risk of this grit being behind the valve or on the guide or something, and either chewing up the valve stem guide or getting into work and fall down onto the piston and eat up the cylinder liner at all. So what I'll go through now is I do a coarse pass on the intakes, a coarse pass on the exhaust, clean that all off, and then do a fine pass, and that'll be right before our final cleaning. From this point, hand lapped all the valves with the coarse and with the fine medium. I've gone through and cleaned the cylinder head really well to make sure that there's none of that machining grit anywhere in there. You really want to pay attention to down in the actual runner. So this is the exhaust runner. Make sure there's nothing around the guide, nothing around the seat, nothing hiding in there. So this is nice and clean. I've also gone through and cleaned all the valves, making sure to keep them in order. So these are how they populate this portion of the cylinder head. From this point, we can now then go through and reassemble the cylinder head. So we can go through, install new valve stem seals, install the valves with the springs, keepers, and retainers. And then the cylinder head can be installed onto the engine. Remember, this is just something to kind of speed up the break-in process. Depending on the engine and depending on how things are machined, it can be something that isn't that necessary, especially if you're using all new components. We're doing this just as a demonstration to show a process that you can do to increase that to decrease that break-in time and allow you to get the engine up and running at its full potential a lot sooner. It also is a good check to make sure that you know that assembling the cylinder head, that these valves will seal up against this cylinder head, and that will not be an issue with it running in the future. So we'll assemble the cylinder head in the next video. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I hope you found this video helpful. See you later.